If overwhelming girth on Space Marines really hits the spot for you, go ahead and hit that like button. Gentlemen, welcome to Conversion Beam. Today we're going to be taking the Primaris Aggressors and we're going to be, in my opinion, giving them a more flavorful look. Now, being left over from one of my many unfinished projects, the Gravis armored bodies from this sprue have already been cut out, but the mold lines and sprue tabs are still very present, so a dull knife is used to scrape all these blemishes away. In addition to this, the arm tabs are removed since we won't be using them. With all the models prepared, the first step I like to take for my Marines is the removal of the Imperialis. There are quite a few different methods that can be used to achieve this. I prefer to use a sharp blade to cut away the bulk and a dull blade to scrape it flat. This will always leave me with a nice flat surface to work with, which is especially true for these big dogs in Gravis armor. As for the Sergeant, I decided to leave his Imperialis intact, given that Aggressors wore mighty power armor and advanced weaponry, and would thus be more honoured than a typical brother of the chapter. In regards to the Aggressor's design, one thing I've never really been able to love is the very bulbous cowling that swallows the Space Marine's head. While it does make the Marine look more protected, I quite like the more recent variations in Gravis armor, the ones with the more exposed head. So I'm going to try and imitate that a little bit by cutting along the detail at the back of the cowling. This is actually done quite easily using some hobby clippers to remove the bulk and a knife to tidy things up. And to further polish it, I run a sanding stick along the edges. After doing that to all of the Marines, I turned my attention to the gorget, the Space Marine's neck protection. I decided I want to copy and paste that gap in the middle along the gorget. My goal here is to kind of mimic the crenellations of a castle, which I think would be very fitting for an Imperial Fist conversion. Anyways, I do this by selecting a file the same thickness as the gap in the middle, filing directly down at the midpoint of each of those side panels. Relying primarily on the thickness of the file makes it quite easy to copy and paste a design with consistent results. With that looking pretty good, I do one final touch up using plastic cement. Because the cement dissolves plastic, it will smooth out any rough patches that are filed down or cut into. So it is applied quite thinly on the gorget, the chest piece, and the cowling, bringing those modified pieces much more in line with the rest of the model. Now this is of course done to all three Marines because uniformity is pleasing. But I'm not done with their little sexy bods quite yet. I wanted to make a rather drastic change to the Sergeant by reposing one of his legs. I did try to be delicate and precise using a sharp knife, but I got very frustrated and brute forced it with a pair of clippers, which is ill-advised, but it all worked out in the end. After messing around a bit, I found an angle that I didn't think looked too bad, and I glued it in place. Once dried, I broke out the green stuff to fill in the gaps left by the repose, cramming it into place using a metal tool. Once the green stuff was in position and smoothed out, I really wanted to recreate the pattern of the power armor's undersuit. Using a knife coated in Vaseline, I tried carving the pattern into the green stuff. And I find myself for the first time grateful that my camera refuses to focus, because I don't want anyone to see how absolutely horrendous this looks. I'm just kidding, there you go. Sorry. Giving up on trying to make that look good, I move on to adding the PP heraldry. A lot of people don't like these and try to remove them from their aggressors, but I think they look pretty neat. Plus it does a really good job hiding the green stuff on the Sergeant. I also added a little reliquary to his back to hide the rest. Now while deciding on what to do next, I attached their power packs completely unmodified. I was considering swapping out their frag storm launchers for something more unique, but I still wanted them to be identifiable as aggressors, so I left them alone this time. So I decided that the final addition to the bodies of these aggressors would be bonding studs. These ones were made using a rivet mold and milliput. I didn't want to overdo it, so I only attached them to the chest of one Marine and the leg of another, because I find with conversions, more often than not, less is more. Finally happy with the bodies, it's time to begin work on the arms. I begin by cutting out the arms from the Aggressor sprue and pulling out what I would consider to be the star of the show for this conversion, that being the Reaper autocannon. These can be found in the Tartaros Terminator kit. So my goal here is to combine the Gravis arm with the autocannon. And the first step I'm going to take is to remove the power fist from the aggressor's arm, which is insanely easy compared to the next part, which involves carving away everything behind the autocannon's forearm mount. This part seems super messy and unrefined, because it is, but I found if I just kept carving away, I would eventually get a good connection point with the Gravis arm. So the next step was to cut off the autocannon barrels, along with what's left of the support bracket underneath. And I'd be left with something that I think nicely represents the aggressor's twin-linked bolt weapons. Once both barrels are drilled out, the weapon is bonded with the Gravis arm. So I repeated that process 2 more times. And note that the weapon I'll be using for the Sergeant doesn't have a great connection point. I did end up filling it in with green stuff later on. Anyways, moving on to the other arm, what I did here was I attached a flamer option onto the power fist. That way I have more to hold onto while I use my Herculean strength to brute force the flamer away from the power fist. And once the surface is cleaned using a knife and sanding sticks, we are left with a reasonably normal looking power fist. One final step I take is to smooth out the rough surface using plastic cement. So after doing that a second time, I decide I never want to do that again. Fortunately, the gods of the bits box blessed me with an old Terminator power fist, which actually quite nicely fit the Gravis profile. So happy with all that, I bond all the arms to the bodies. And I'm gonna be honest, at this point here, I was starting to think that I really messed up trying to repose the Sergeant. I really thought he was starting to look a bit wacky. Anyways, with all that assembled, I moved on to the shoulder pads, which is usually one of the easiest parts of any conversion. But I wanted to add a cogtooth pattern to that little bit of excess trim. For this, I found that using a round file makes it much easier to get a consistent pattern than using a square one. I feel like these are some pretty solid tips for those who play Iron Hands. Anyways, once I'm happy with all 6 shoulder pads, I apply some thin plastic cement to smooth things out. Once dry, they are promptly attached to the aggressors. Now turning my attention to the power pack. I spent quite a while thinking on what I should do with these, but I ended up just putting on the original ammo attachment, figuring that it would make sense that these Marines would be hauling around a boatload of bolt rounds. But for the Sergeant, I had to do something a little bit extra. Because I got the autocannon second hand, one of them was missing its ammo box, so I wanted to use this as an opportunity to kitbash an ammo feed. To begin, I used an old Dreadnought faceplate by cutting away the bottom bit and gluing it where the ammo box is supposed to go. Then after a lengthy amount of time trying to find the right bits and bend them into shape, I found that this ammo feed from the Desolation Marines is the best fit I could find. Once it was all glued together, I wasn't too happy with how non-uniform it looked, so I used some thin strips of plastic card to kind of blend things together. Once I was happy with that, the final step for this conversion, aside from purity seals which I never film because I always forget, is the helmets. For this, I have selected the Iron Hands Mark III helmets. Since these bits are cast in resin, they had to be attached using superglue, which completes this conversion. Now, even though I am quite happy with how these aggressors turned out, I do feel like I rushed a few bits and they aren't as refined as my previous conversions. And I'm not sure I made the right choice with the bolt guns. I feel like they register as a weapon more powerful than what the aggressors actually have. But I suppose that doesn't matter too much because I think they look really cool. I would love to know what you guys think down in the comments, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.